Asset Management Corporation of Nigeria has announced a comprehensive plan to refinance its 5.7 trillion zero-coupon bonds and to commence the sale of 3 banks. I'm joined now in the studio by Mustafa Chikeobi. He's the CEO of AMCON to talk us through the details of this transaction. Thank you so much, Mustafa, for joining us. And I think this is something that I think will excite the markets. Clarity on how AMCON would like to refinance its bonds. Can you just talk us through the key points that investors should note at this stage?
What investors should note is we've always said that we will be refinancing our bonds and nobody will be compelled to roll over their bonds.
Right.
By December of this year, we will have refinanced all of Series 1, 2, 3, and 4. All the bonds, all the investors will be paid back. And Series 5, which is the last one, which is held by investors, will be refinanced by October 2014.
Right.
At the conclusion of the exercise, there will be no holders of AMCON debt except the Central Bank of Nigeria.
Right.
And we believe that that should reassure investors to get their monies back in time. It should reassure the government that the guarantee is unlikely to be called. We'll be paying down about 35% of the debt as of December 2014 and refinancing a much smaller portion.
All right.
And there's a plan to pay down that 3.6 trillion, approximately 500 billion a year, so that by the year 10, it has been extinguished.
All right, we'll talk a bit about how the recovery is progressing, because that's a key part of this. But can you just explain again how the investors in those bonds will be repaid this year? Will they be paid in cash, or exactly how does this work?
We have to consider the impact on the money supply of Nigeria.
Right.
We don't want to throw in all that much cash into the money supply. So our plan is to do some cash and some treasury bills so that the impact on money supply can be managed by the Central Bank of Nigeria. So we'll be talking with them, and we'll be using treasury bills, short-term treasury bills, and cash, so the investors will know that they're getting really liquid instruments, not bonds again.
And of course, quite a few, in fact, a majority of the holders of AMCON bonds today are banks, so I guess it makes sense for them to hold treasury bills, and those, of course, will qualify as liquidity instruments. But talk us through maybe going to the next phase after you've paid back this. Explain exactly how the balance of the 3.6 trillion works, because there's a sense that this is something that's going to blow up Nigeria's debt profile, given the fact that the AMCON bonds were guaranteed. So it was just a contingent liability for the government, but now is anything changing at all?
No, it remains a contingent liability, and the source of repayment will be AMCON recoveries and the sinking fund. So as long as that's the case, and we can show clearly that there's enough from those two sources to pay the debt, it remains a contingent liability. It does not affect federal government balance sheet in any way.
Okay, so talk us
through. It will affect it only if the sources of repayment were the federal government.
Right.
But again, we've always said the federal government of Nigeria will not have to pay for this. Right. And we're paying off 20%, 35% of it in the first 3 years, right, which is way ahead of schedule.
Right.
And we just want to reassure everyone that we're on track, right, to pay off this through recoveries and through the sinking fund. And right, the federal government guarantee will not be called.
All right, so we have the sinking fund, and of course we have recovery. So how well is AMCON doing with respect to recoveries?
This is something that's always been misunderstood. In our planning, we plan for the recoveries to start after year 2 and continue to year 10.
Right.
These are difficult loans. These are loans that the banks have been trying to collect and have not been able to collect it. So it's remarkable that we've done so well in recovering so much at this point. It's a difficult process. Some of these debtors are difficult to deal with. But we will tell you that based on our planning, we're way ahead of schedule. We have a lot of powers to recover debt. Those powers are working out. Right. And we have a plan to recover as much as we plan to. And we're way ahead of schedule.
But can you be specific at this stage of how much you've recovered so far? Can you give us any specifics?
I don't want to give you numbers that are not accurate, but I think that in terms of cash, we've recovered close to 300 billion in terms of restructure. Right. And restructure are loans that are paying. They're now paying us again. We have about 800 billion of restructured loans. Right. And so it's a matter of managing very difficult situations. And again, all I can say is that we're way ahead of schedule. We're happy with it. And the problem will not be from recoveries.
Right. At least I imagine that the 3 banks that you hold will be a part of that recovery process, because you will sell those assets. So talk us through the plans for that. We've already announced that in 30 days you would start the process for the sale of Enterprise Bank.
Yes, but I don't want people to, and sale seems to be a misleading statement. We are divesting our shares in those banks.
Right.
And so the result of that is that the banks will stay largely intact. The result of that is that employees will be largely intact. In some cases, management may in fact remain if management has done a good enough job and the new investors want to retain the management. So it's actually a divestment of shares as opposed to a sale. And I say this because I don't want employees or depositors
to get scared
or to feel that there's going to be a major change. We own it and we want to divest our shares into private hands.
Okay.
So I don't think there'll be much dislocation with the banks.
All right.
But going back to your question, we want to start with Enterprise Bank for a number of reasons. It's the smallest of the three, and everybody learns things. And we want to make sure that if we make any mistakes in the first one, that we learn from it so that the next two, which are bigger, are more seamless.
Right.
So there's a process to go through. Right. The process will have to be approved, of course, by approving authorities, Central Bank of Nigeria, Ministry of Finance, the Presidency. So we're starting that process, but we're ready to divest at this point.
Okay, so, and for the other two banks, the hope is that all the three banks, in fact, would be sold by some point next year.
Divested.
If you want to use the word divested, no problem. Divested by the end of 2014.
That's
but
correct.
More specifically with Enterprise Bank, talk us through how quickly you imagine that will be done. I know within the 30 days you have indicated that you will start the process. Is this something that you think will be completed this year?
I'll be surprised if it's not completed this year.
Right. And what can you tell us about the interest for that company? We know that First Round First Round of South Africa has indicated that it's interested in some of the AMCON banks. Can you tell us how many bidders you have for Enterprise?
We've had many unsolicited bids, which we do not encourage. Well in excess of 20 unsolicited bids.
Right.
So we haven't taken them seriously. When we announce the process, we'll be able to tell you how many people are really serious, and then we'll do the process of narrowing them down to the ones who are really serious and who can afford it. But there's a lot of interest in buying the banks, and we want to make sure that we do it properly, in a transparent fashion, and in a way that all Nigerians can feel was done fairly.
Right. Let's talk about how this whole process has evolved for AMCON, how it has intervened in the banks. Of course, we know it was created to stabilize the system. And we've seen, of course, the volatility in financial markets in other parts of the world. Your thoughts about what the world can learn from what we've been able to achieve in Nigeria with AMCON?
I think if the metrics are clear. The increase in value of the banks since AMCON is well in excess of 5 trillion. So even as an investment, if one had made the investment to do AMCON, it has paid off in terms of the value of the banks. So the banks have done well. And we're hoping that as the banks get more comfortable, they'll lend more and hire more. So the country has done well. So we think that metric is clear. We think that many people who were concerned, this was a very big intervention, and many people did not really understand all the engineering that went into it. This announcement we're making with the central bank is to let people know that we have planned for any number of contingencies and that things are on track. And if one way didn't work, we had other plans to do things. And so this should reassure people that we have thought these things through. All the people concerned have thought these things through, and things are progressing in a way that the world can look and say, these people have done this well. They have saved their financial system at no cost to the government and no cost to the depositors, and retained much of the employment. And all the agitators about what we're doing, they have been the beneficiaries because we have saved a lot of jobs, we have saved all the depositors, and now we're in the process of making sure that the government does not have to pay for it. So we're quite proud so far what we've done.
Well, absolutely. I think it's quite commendable what we can, especially with the stability. We've seen quite significant stability over the last few years in the banking system. But talk to us about your engagement with some of the debtors, how that is working. You've talked about the fact that you've found ways to save jobs, quite a few of them. Some of the big ones that grab the headlines include the likes of Aero Contractors. You that's the airline company. Talk to us about how you're engaging some of these debtors to get back this money in a process that is the impact is not as negative as it could be in a case where, for instance, you are selling assets and people have to lose their jobs.
Well, the objective always is that we must get our money back. So sometimes you read in the press that we see somebody's property. Our interest really is to get them to come and talk to us, because we're not interested in selling a whole bunch of properties into a depressed market. And in every case that we've actually taken really aggressive action, luckily, they've come to talk to us. We'll be announcing major settlements of some of these very difficult debtors in the next couple of weeks. So I would say that the people that did the AMCON Act were very wise. They gave us enough powers, and the courts have been amazing. And the courts, I believe the judiciary has excelled. They have done the right thing. They've been against us a couple of times, and we've gone back and corrected ourselves. But the result is that many of these debtors are coming to resolve. We don't announce the resolution. We don't announce that they've come to settle because we don't want to embarrass anybody.
Right.
But in every case, they have come to us and talked, and we'll be making major settlements.
But so you have a huge chunk of assets, though. And the question is, how do you, in quotes, get rid of the assets? What is the general approach to settling these debts? Is it like trying to get these people back in business so you don't have to repossess these assets? And of course, the assets that you do have, I mean, many people, there are reports that AMCON has a huge chunk of real estate, all kinds of assets that may be very difficult to sell in this market. So your thoughts on that?
Well, we've had more people asking us to buy assets than we're willing to sell. So the notion that we can't sell the assets is really not the experience we've had. But yes, our first objective is to restructure, reconstruct. It's only at the end that we must enforce. We must enforce because we must collect our money. So yes, we like people to keep their businesses, we like people to keep their houses, we like people to keep their homes, if they can show us a clear path and a willingness to pay. It's only when all those things fail that we enforce. And once we enforce, we will sell in an orderly, transparent fashion. We have an asset disposal policy, which we're very careful about, so that everything that we sell or we dispose of is done in a way that nobody is uncomfortable with what we've done. So yes, enforcement and sale is our last option, and we try not to go there.